This is Mike Newton. We're here at the New York Comic Con for 2008, and we're about to speak to one of comic book's greatest legends, the legendary Jim Steronko. And Jim Steronko is an extraordinary individual. He's an illustrator, writer, author, comic book artist, escape artist, all of the above, filmmaker too. And we're going to ask Mr. Steronko a few questions. He doesn't make too many appearances, so this is a rare one. So enjoy, Mr. Steronko. I remember coming up and getting your Captain America run that you did with the Hulk and your Shield run. What was it like doing work for Marvel in those days?
Well, Captain America is my favorite character. So you can imagine what it's like for a kid to be growing up and suddenly have the ability to contribute to the legend of Captain America. Now that's something really special. You know, that's like a dream come true. What else was it? Well, it was hard work. It was a lot of fun. It was very challenging. I came out of two other jobs at the time. I was working at an ad agency. I was also playing location gigs like 4 or 5 nights a week. So I took on a comic book a month on top of that, which means there wasn't much time to sleep, you know? I did it anyway.
One of the things about that Captain America series that you did that was so revolutionary, I'm an ex-comic book artist and former illustrator, and you used to take an entire scene and break it up in multiple panels by chopping it up, and you used to use a whole lot of psychedelic and different visual effects that were kind of not common to use in comics at that time. What influenced you into bringing those special effects, those type of camera angles, and that type of graphics into comics at that time?
You know, that's a good question. And I remember the answer. My approach to comic books, my approach to the narrative art is really in a cinematic mold. Not that movies are comics, they're not. But what I did, everything I learned about storytelling, I learned it in the movie theater. So I took the best ideas of the greatest directors, like Wellman and Wells, Hitchcock, and I reduced them to rules on the comics page. That's one of the reasons that it struck a certain resonance with you. Like you mentioned, I split up let's say a full third panel into smaller sections. That was my cinematic way of showing, let's say, a certain kind of motion. The aspect of bringing psychedelic art, pop art, op art, expressionism into comics. I think comics are a natural and also a very forgiving medium. Like if it doesn't work this month, try it again next month, you know? But I felt that comics and trends like psychedelic art really went together well. It was a natural. And I pulled it into the form in that Nick Fury Agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., that very contemporary kind of strip, and I think it worked beautifully. You still remember?
One of the things also that Jim used to do, you in Captain America, even in S.H.I.E.L.D., you'd have a full page that almost had a Salvatore Dali surrealistic type of things with the face dripping with the skulls or an eye in the background and the planes going back in perspective. And, you know, as a kid drawing and seeing all that, it was really, really wonderful. I'd like to ask you one specific thing, the history of comics, because that's how our conversation started. And as I told you, I bought the first one at 12 years old, read it so much, carried around so much it was shredded that I saw it one day in a store brand new and I had to buy a second copy that I put in plastic that I don't touch. But what inspired you to write the History of Comics Volume 1 and Volume 2?
Well, it's probably not as inspirational as you think. See, I used to drive up. I'm from Pennsylvania. And I used to drive up to New York a lot. And of course, that's where my Marvel Comics work was. And 2 hours up, or 2.25 hours, and 2 hours back, and I thought, you know, if I could get an idea that I could make some money during this trip, it would be worth the trip. And I remember Stan saying to me that Marvel had trouble releasing as many books as they wanted to in the summertime because that's where the big market was, right? Well, I thought, wouldn't it be a good idea if Stan Lee did a history of comics in comic book size and released it for the summer audience? Well, I pitched the idea to Stan, and he said, yeah, it might be something, but he said, I don't have time to write it. I said, no, you don't understand. I'd write it for you. I'd ghost write it for you. He said, well, show me what it would be like. So the next time I came up, I had some samples, some sample text, and he looked at it, and I had written some material about DC, and it was kind of flattering. And he looked at it and said, like, Jim, I can't say the stuff about the competition. And I said, but you got a natural product here. And Stan said, why don't you write it? And I said, who cares? Who cares whether I'd write anything? And he said, you see that stack of mail? There's a mail bag over in the corner. He said, that's all your mail. He said, a lot of people would do it. He said, you should write that book. And I did, and the rest is history.
How long did it take you to write Volume 1 and Volume 2? Because that was really really thorough work.
Probably about a year apiece. But you have to remember that in those days there was no internet to do research on. You know, it was all skin of the teeth material. But I had spent my entire life up to that time learning, reading about comics, learning about comic history, and eventually getting into the business, so I knew many of the guys and I could just call them up or visit them and get all that data into it.
My last question, having such a awesome grasp on the medium in terms of your drawing, your perspective, or where did you study artwork? Where did you study art, and where did you learn, and who were your inspirations?
Well, I had a lot of inspirations, but I never studied anywhere. I never went to art school. Matter of fact, I barely graduated from high school. I was in a lot of trouble as a kid, and I realized I had to do something, so I fell back on a couple of things that I did reasonably well that I liked, and one of those things was artwork. But I learned from the people that we love, like Jack Kirby and Reed Crandall, John Romita, Bob Powell, Wally Wood, Al Williamson, and all guys that I knew along the way. So I studied their art and eventually sort of synthesized my own version of it. So comics meant a lot to me.
Well, in closing, being that you've been such a part of this medium for more than 30 years or so, how do you feel being here in 2008 and seeing the movies and seeing the conventions and seeing what this medium has become since 1968?
Yeah, it's really long overdue. But now films have the technology, you know, to produce this sort of fantastic super realism right now. You know, with the digital art the way it was, anything could be produced. Before that, it was not easy to do. So I think really that culture is catching up to comics, and we're enjoying every second of it.
Well, this is BlokTV, and this is Jim Steronko, a living legend and a master of the comic books medium. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jim.